Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Bible Thumper Podcast, where somebody's got to say it. My name is Patrick Hayes, your regular host, and with me this evening is Robert Ballard, who is a Libertarian Party candidate for Mesa County Clerk and Recorder. Robert, did I get that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well.
Good. So I wanted to kind of just start off by telling the audience what we're going to get into in a minute, which is the question, how much Christianity should be in the government? And I think when I asked a bunch of my friends that over the coming months, I got a wide variety of answers. And I don't think a lot of people have really thought that through and the ramifications of what their beliefs would end up with. So we're going to get into that. But I wanted to start off, could you tell everybody at home, because there are some folks where tonight's podcast might be their very first introduction to libertarianism. So I don't need you to get into the foundation of the Federal Reserve and monetary theory. Okay, you don't need to start with all of it, but can you give us a brief, give us the 2-minute explanation to someone that's brand new, that doesn't know anything about libertarianism? What should we know?
So the libertarian movement is basically a movement towards liberty, right? And that's the liberty part of libertarianism. People like Thomas Jefferson, John Locke, even people like Aristotle are all inspirations of the libertarianism movement. And the general idea is that we should be suspicious of people in power, suspicious of governments that are too large for their own good. And generally, we also believe in a very limited role of government, and particularly me as a libertarian, I believe that role of government is to protect our rights as individuals.
Okay, so what makes a libertarian different from a Republican?
Action, usually. I've seen a lot of Republicans say the right things,
sure,
and but when it comes to the reality on the ground, they usually have their cave point, right? So it's either in spending. It's like, well, everyone wants this, big government center, that isn't really protecting our rights, but is giving us free stuff. So we're going to go ahead and take your money and provide this. That's where the sacrifices are coming in, is they're willing to sacrifice some of those principles of limited government and provide us more than we need, which gives the government more power than they're supposed to have.
Hey, we have to suspend the rules of the free market in order to save the free market. You remember that one?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I threw up in my mouth when I heard that. I remember watching the television and I heard that live, and I turned to my wife and I was like, did he just say that? I couldn't believe my ears. So, okay. So now you are running for Mesa County Clerk and Recorder on the Libertarian Party. Do we call it a ticket?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about what that position does and what you are hoping to accomplish.
Yeah. So there's 5 basic departments of the Clerk and Recorder's office. There's the clerk to the board, which basically is just recording all of the meetings throughout the county commissioner meetings, land use meetings, water use meetings, all those. We can record all of that, put it into documents, and then it's all recorded as permanent record. The second one is your records. So when you get married, when you buy a deed, those are all recorded at the Clerk and Recorder's office as well. We also we're in charge of certain licensing. So that's like liquor licensing, marijuana licensing, and certain other licensing that goes with small businesses. And then the most complicated one, the most taxing on most people, is the motor vehicles. So when you go and register your vehicle and you wait 45 minutes in line, and then you get there and
45 minutes?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
And then they don't have the records, right? So that's an efficiency or management of the Clerk and Recorder's office. And then a lot of times, arguably, what a lot of people say is the most important office is the elections office, because, well, that's the foundation of a democracy, is your elections. And that is something that the Clerk and Recorder's office is in charge of implementing at the county level.
Okay. You said licensing. Let me ask you this. who decides what requires a license and what does not as far as business goes?
Your state.
Okay, so you guys do the work, but you guys implement the policy.
Yeah.
You don't initiate the policy.
Yeah, from my understanding. Also, I think certain counties can limit the number of liquor licenses or marijuana licenses that are allowed in a county. As far as that's concerned, I've always seen when you put limits on those types of licenses, that gives big box stores more of an opportunity to succeed in your county and fewer opportunities for small businesses to succeed.
Let me ask you this. So are you going to have to hire people to run those different departments?
So there are already people hired there, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, that is something that, because it is directed by the state constitution that I have to provide those things. Yeah, we are going to have to hire those people to provide those services.
So I know when the president of the United States gets elected, usually everybody in the former cabinet resigns and offers a resignation letter as a courtesy.
Yeah.
Is anything like that happen, or does everyone just expect to keep their job?
So that does happen from time to time, especially if it's a really controversial clerk. Like if it's not a very well liked clerk, or they sat there just bad mouthing all of the processes of it.
Sure.
So then when they get
all
elected,
are counting their days until they're fired.
Yes, or they just quit, right? Because they don't want to work with somebody that just sat there bad mouthing them all over, podcasts, public radio, and everything. So, you see a lot of turnover right at first. I'm hoping not to see that, because the things that we have to fix in the office are very minute things, processing things. Things to make it more efficient, but there's nothing really wrong with most of the people that I've met anyway. And I've been working in there for going on about a year now, trying to get to know that team.
Okay. So are there any high paying positions that need to be filled? Would you fill those with any, I don't know, public, local, personality of a podcast?
Are you looking for a job?
I don't know. I mean, government work, right? You don't have to do much. Do you have to show up? Do you get a good pension? Anything beats, podcasting.
The one thing that I know has to be filled right away is the deputy clerk. And that's going to be,
your assistant.
Right. Essentially. Or, your backup, and that's going to be important for me, because I serve my country, and I'm still proudly serving my country. And I do know that there are going to be times when I have to leave. And whoever the deputy clerk is going to be has to be competent.
Yeah, obviously.
So that's somebody that's going to have that same level of management, that same level of leadership, and a certain background in running an office like that.
Sure. Okay. So is there anything you are hoping to change or implement or fix or make better when you get in there? Anything on your list? What's on the chopping block? Like I've always known what I would run on if I was running for president. It'll never happen, but it's the fun conversation to have on your couch when you're listening to Paul. Well, Dad, what would you do? So, I mean, is there anything that you're currently looking at or you think needs to be remedied in some way?
Well, the biggest thing that needs to be corrected or fixed or reoriented right now is we have a lot of hurt and a lot of divide in our county over the controversy that's happened in the past, couple of years. And, it doesn't really matter on which side you're on. What we need to be able to do is trust our election system moving into
approval, Robert.
Right.
The studio audience agrees.
We need to trust that system moving into 2023. We need to trust it moving into 2024. But there's also a lot of people that are concerned that, there's county clerks that are able to act outside of their authority and undermine the system. So my biggest thing is we're trying to heal this community, heal this county, and bring us back together again as it should be. We've let national party politics divide us, and I think it's time for a change there.
Because really, no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, you want a free and fair election.
Yes, regardless of what party you're in. If you're a Democrat, you need to trust it. If you're a Republican, you need to trust it. So it needs to be fair for everyone, and everyone needs to be able to trust it. I think that's where I've got that upper hand. Is I'm the third party. I'm not beholden to any major party politics. I'm not beholden to any major party narrative. And what my main focus on is the people of Mesa County, not my party.
Has Mesa County had a Libertarian candidate in any position?
Fully elected? No.
So you would be groundbreaking.
Yes. Not, I might be wrong on this one, but I do believe also I would be the first partisan Libertarian in recent history to be elected even at the county level, I think.
How long has it been since we've had a Libertarian elected?
I don't know. I really don't. I know it's been a minute, right? And then, and again, I could be wrong.
Sure,
I
we'd
know
have
that
to
we've
look it
got,
up.
yeah, we would. I know that we've got city councilmen. I know we've got people on different boards throughout the state. But it's been a while since someone who is a Libertarian actually got elected as a Libertarian.
Okay. Do you think the L next to your name is going to help you or hurt you? And is that everywhere in the country, or does it depend on, the region?
Yeah, so that's the question of the day, right? So I would say nationwide, if this was to come down to the entire country, I don't think it would help me at all. In fact, I think most people would look at it and be like, this election's too important. Regardless of what election it is, they would always say this election's too important. We got to vote for either an R or a D.
Yeah.
But
well, we both know that no third party candidate in America's history has ever done meaningful change, going all the way back to, say,
Abraham Lincoln,
right, for example.
Yeah, no, exactly. And
for those of you that comment on my YouTube channel who obviously just missed the joke, Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican for president, that was a third party candidate at the time.
Right.
Just wanted to fill everyone in. Go
yeah.
ahead.
And so anyway, now here at the local level, I think it's actually going to help a little bit because, there's a lot of Republicans that have been perturbed by their own local county party, either because they were too extreme or not extreme enough. And then also, people that lean more to the left, they're looking for somebody that can win the election. That's not a Republican. And they know that Democrats don't really have a chance here in the county. So surprisingly enough, voting Democrat is a lost vote or a wasted vote, excuse me,
in Mesa County.
In Mesa County, and a third party vote is actually a competitive vote. So.
Wow. Okay. So it gives some of the Democrats someone to vote for, and you'll pull away votes from some Republicans. And for any Republican who is listening, if you are a party member, if you are involved in Republican politics, please know that you lost my vote. It will probably never come back. I couldn't imagine it ever coming back, but you have failed, and you have failed so badly for so many years that I currently consider you a joke. And I am putting all of my energy into convincing everybody that I know on planet Earth that you need to be a libertarian. So you not only lost someone, you lost a very outspoken, opinionated person who's going to make it their life's mission to destroy the Republican Party.
Well, and not too long ago, I was a registered Republican as well, and just that, they failed on so many accounts to meet the principles that I was trying to achieve. Now, I've always considered myself a libertarian, as do many Republicans. But I had the sentiment that many of those Republicans have, and that is that the Libertarian Party just doesn't have the traction to do the things that we need to get done. And I think that's still true.
Still a fear.
But here at the county level, I'm not asking people to change their vote at the national level. I know you're going to vote for your Bidens and your Trumps. I got it. But here at the local level, we can do something different. And I plan on showing the world that this is how libertarians are going to govern.
I think it's a great idea that we start at the local level, and that's where we make a change, where it's realistic to get elected. And I'm not saying that the libertarians should not put forth a strong candidate for president. Haven't seen one in a little bit. Okay. But I think that is a good idea, but I think it would be very important to put one in at a local level where you can make a change. If you could imagine in Mesa County, Colorado, the idea that CMU, right, Colorado Mesa University, does not allow concealed carry on their campus is absolutely criminal. Out of all the places in Colorado, how on earth does CMU not allow that? And for me, the idea is on the local level, we could affect a change that could actually make someplace safer, help something out, and that would be a very big win for freedom, even if it doesn't affect the national stage.
Yeah.
So I think getting libertarians elected locally to start where you can make a difference in my life is a great place to begin.
You brought up a good point. So I'm a concealed carry instructor, and I guess I wasn't really aware that there was a special rule there. In fact, I had thought before, so this is something either after the podcast or whatever, we're gonna have to look up, because I thought statewide that state-run, public-run college campuses you could conceal carry on. There were certain places that you couldn't, and no jurisdiction was allowed to infringe on your concealed carry permit.
I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, so we'll have to look that up, because I need to know that, obviously, for my classes. So
no, it's a good one, and I'm definitely, I'm part of a few Facebook groups for concealed carry on campus, which is a national movement, and now you got me second guessing whether I'm right or wrong about about CMU.
I've been called out in the middle of classes all the time, and I quit putting my heels in the stand, right? Because sometimes I'm just wrong.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Let's check it out. Okay. All right, so let's change gears here. We're about 25% of the way into our time. I wanted to talk to everybody about how much Christianity should be in government. Now, the reason I wanted to bring that up is because the name of the podcast is Bible Thumper, and mostly we're just going to have Christians listening here. And I've talked to a lot of folks, and the answers that I've gotten have been surprising and even shocking to me. So I wanted to give the perspective that you have and that I have, and kind of give people a different idea. So do you have any questions for me? Any things you want to start out with as far as points you want to bring up, or do you want me to jump in?
Well, I'll start off with just so all the viewers know, I'm a very devout Christian. My family and I, in fact, today we just celebrated Shabbat. We celebrate our Shabbat on Sunday, just it's a little more culturally appropriate. And what that means is Saturday night, when the sun goes down, we put our phones away, we put our electronics away, and we spend the next 24 hours focusing on family and God, right? So, when I was a kid, I grew up as a pastor's kid as well. My dad was a Methodist minister. And so I've been through that whole side of the church. I also fell out of the church for a little while as well, where I just kind of had a grudge on my shoulder about the church. And then I came back. So, just so that way your listeners understand what perspective I'm coming at it from. That and kind of gives a background.
Yeah. And honestly, when you and I first met at a libertarian function, it was a relief, because I really did expect to be the only Christian at the table. It was nice to hear that. I wanted you on this podcast regardless, but it does fit in a little bit better because you at least have a background and knowledge and understanding of both sides. The idea of government and libertarianism and freedom, and also the idea of church and the Bible. So, okay, so here is kind of what I came up with, and at any point, stop me, jump in, tell me I'm wrong. We can, hash out whatever. One of the ideas I wanted to bring up was that when the Constitution was written, there were two groups of Americans. There were those who wanted the new instrument of government to give faith a larger role, and there were those who feared that it would do so. So the first question is why? Okay, some wanted a larger role of faith in the government because they recognize the benefits of a code of morals in any society. Okay, so here's my question for you. What's the other side of that coin? What's the problem with that?
Well, first off, I'll talk about what I agree with, right?
Go for it.
Our founding fathers mentioned several times that the government that they were creating was a government for, well-moraled people, right?
Yes.
And they said specifically for a people of, and I can't remember how they said it, but
it was a moral and religious.
Moral and religious, yeah.
That it wasn't going to work without a moral and religious people,
right? Because
either one,
because the idea, right, was that they were going to implement a government that said we are going to protect your rights as individuals, and we're going to give you some general guidelines, a little bit more than what even I would necessarily say was necessary, and then you're free as an individual. That's freedom, right? The reason why why I think the founders chose the right path in keeping government out of the government, or keeping government out of religion, excuse me, is because me personally, as a man of faith, I've been exploring my faith, and I would say I'm just barely scratching the surface over the past 2 years, 3 years, really deep diving, reading the Bible, learning what I actually believe as a Christian, and what life I want to follow. This is something that, as an individual, you need to do in order to establish your moral code to live by. And if I were to just say, hey, nope, you're going to have to be a Christian, you have to follow these certain Christian codes, you're going to resent it. And you're going to question, like, why do I have to follow your religion? What's the benefit of it? And you're, instead of finding God and finding righteousness, you're going to reject it. And so that's why, that's the main reason why I'm against a government sponsored religion.
And what I had down here was the idea that you cannot legislate morality.
Yeah.
So no amount of laws can make a people moral. One is moral because of their beliefs, which results in a change of behavior. But those things cannot be forced upon you with laws.
Yeah.
Okay. And trying to do so usually has the opposite effect. And there are countries in the world where they have completely locked it down. You know, you have the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. You're not allowed to bring a Bible onto Saudi Arabian soil. If you are Jewish, you're not allowed to step foot on Saudi Arabian soil. If you have a stamp from Israel in your passport, they will likely reject you until you got to get back on the plane and leave.
That's right. Yeah.
You know?
I think to add to that, I think I showed you these books. So I've got a couple books here. I've got the Anti-Federalist Papers, the Federalist Papers. I've got the works of the founding documents, and then I've also got my Bible here. But one thing while I was preparing for this podcast was, I noted that one of the recommended amendments, proposed amendments to the Constitution when they first drafted it, was that religion or the duty which we owe our Creator and the manner of discharging it can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. And therefore, all men have an equal, natural, and unalienable right to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, and that no particular religious sect or society ought to be favored or established by law or preference to others. Right. So right there, you're seeing that exactly what you're talking about is that, you cannot you cannot force the following moral code is only done through reason and conviction, right? And if someone were to legislate morality from the law, they're going to reject it,
because any legislation, with it comes force.
Exactly.
And the fact is, you cannot force people to be good. People are going to obey God because they love God and they have a desire to, not because the government forces them to. Let's just take the front page of any newspaper in any major city and let's see how well forcing people to obey laws is working.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you have teenagers?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
so
several.
I mean, what it's like to try and implement rules that are extremely hard to follow. They're going to break them. Right. And once they start breaking them, now here, when you're parenting your kids, that's your job, right?
Sure.
It's a moral teaching point, right? You're supposed to say, hey, do you know why I have this rule for you? It's so that way you can live better. As a Christian, we do that all the time, right? Like I say, okay, well, why is X, Y, and Z not allowed according to the Bible? And you have to sit there and think about why God would want you to live that life. And then you can really actually explore your faith in that way and be like, oh, because God wants me to live this life that he created for me, right? And live in righteousness. However, if I were to force that on you and you don't believe that in your heart and you're not going to explore that faith, you're just going to reject it. And now all of a sudden we're having to do what they do in some of these Arab worlds, where you're physically doing capital punishment and corporal punishment to enforce your religion. And then we lose sight of righteousness.
Yeah. The whole point is, again, the goal is in Christianity is to improve the relationship between God and the Christian. And for the lost, we want to introduce them to Jesus and the Bible. We want to see them put their trust and faith in him. We want to see them saved, and we want to see them have a desire to grow. And using an instrument of force to try to get them closer to God, it just doesn't work. Now,
Right. So going back to basically the original question is, how much influence should the government have in enforcing religion?
Now, wait, the first question was how much Christianity should be in the government? Because we're going to answer that question too.
Okay.
That's coming up next.
So how much Christianity should be in government? When it comes to your beliefs as an individual, like a legislature or something, or a legislator or something like that, you acting according to your conscience in what you believe the role of government, the difference between man's law and God's moral law.
Wait, there's a difference?
There's a huge difference, right? As a legislator or somebody that's making the laws, understanding that difference and only applying what needs to be applied in man's law to protect people's rights, so that way they can in a healthy society, healthy structure, pursue God's moral law. That's the influence of Christianity in government.
And one of the jobs of government is to protect the rights of people to not pursue God.
Yeah. Yep.
That has to be, because here's the problem. As soon as we say that the job of government is to force people to pursue God, then it's only a matter of time before another group gets in there and forces you to pursue their God.
Yep. The instant you give them power, the person you hate the most in life is going to use it against you.
Yeah. Okay, so now if we go to the other side, there's a group that feared a government having faith be a larger role. When they were forming the Constitution, there was that group. They were concerned that, things were going to be implemented that was going to force a certain religion. Even some that were Christian had that concern. Now, my question for you would be, why were they concerned? What was their big issue?
Well, some of those things that you talked about, some of the laws that are passed in Saudi Arabia and those, they seem extreme to us because they are extreme. But I would say if I were to tell you all the laws, the moral code that I live by, a lot of people would say that's pretty extreme. So for example, I've all but gotten rid of pornography out of my life, right? Because I think it's a something that is a crime to my wife, and it's a crime to my mental health. But however, that is something that I can't process in my mind to say why you should be disallowed from doing it. You as a Christian probably shouldn't, right? But and we can have a philosophical discussion on why. But if I were to go out there and say that we're going to ban this, not everyone's going to agree with it. And again, they're going to reject that. And they're going to say, well, everything that you're just trying to push your religion on us. And I just don't want to believe in it. Also, I think the founders were afraid of, like you said, another religion coming in, and that was completely the antithesis of the West Foundation, taking over and then implementing their code and eliminating our rights to believe and pursue happiness in our own way.
Okay, so I want to give everybody an idea that I think most people do not consider or think of. So for you and I, if we were to look at the history of less than 100 years ago, what would be included in that? And if we extend that out to 150 years ago, so less than 100 years ago, we saw World War II.
Okay.
Let's see, it's 2022. So just over 100 years ago, we had World War I in there. And if we went back 150 years ago, now I just lost the dates. When was the Civil War?
1860 something.
Okay.
I think.
So if we are looking at a time span of 150 years, and let's face it, we talk about the Civil War and the lessons we've learned from it pretty regularly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. How often do you talk to anyone about the Spanish American War or you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The French and Indian War. Okay. So these things are a little bit further away, and it's like, I really couldn't tell you much about it. In 1776 and the lead up to the Declaration of Independence, you have to remember that only 150 years ago, we had from their ancestors in Europe, we had King Henry VIII killing dozens of Catholics and Protestants and Anabaptists because they disagreed with him. We had his daughter, the Catholic Queen Mary I of England, killing hundreds of religious dissenters who were burned at the stake. We have Mary's sister, Elizabeth I, killed hundreds of Catholics. Over in Switzerland, John Calvin was judge, jury, and executioner of a heretic who was burned at the stake. Martin Luther persecuted and killed Anabaptists that disagreed with his doctrine. They came from a place where within the last 100 to 150 years, they saw, and I'll give you one more, Galileo was almost killed for publicly speaking out against church doctrine. Now, all of those things that I just listed, what do all those stories have in common?
That government had the power to enforce and persuade religion.
You got it. And the government was in charge and had the force to implement the rules of the religion. And when people disobeyed them, they literally tied them up to a pile of wood and burnt them in the town square. That's what the government was doing. So in 1776, you go back less than 100 years, the same amount of time where you and I are thinking about World War II veterans, they had people that lived through and saw it happen.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And, and what we saw there, right? What they were afraid of was people using the religion that they believed in and they had full faith in, not something that like, oh, well, we hate this religion that took over. No, this is something that they still currently believed in and had full faith in, that had been used and wielded against their own people. Yep. And that's actually something that this is probably going to get some shots fired and you're going to get, blown up a little bit, right?
It's okay.
This is something that in our own political current climate, people are using our religion against us, right? So, one that most people will agree with is Joe Biden going out and saying that he's a devout Catholic, but also espousing to values that are adamantly
completely anti-Catholic across the board.
But we see the same thing on the Republican side, where you'll see the very first thing a Republican will do is get up there and be like, I'm a Christian.
Oh,
yeah. It's like, and they hear it from cheers, or they'll you'll hear a Republican sit there and do this huge diatribe about how they believe in the Bible, and they'll quote verses and all that stuff that makes it, fits into their speech real nice. And then you find out, later on that they had demons that were not just like demons that we all deal with, right? Yeah. But demons that basically make it very clear that they were not, in fact, Christian. They were using our faith in order to win power.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we got to be careful of. And again, it's one of those same things that if we start letting government have more of an influence in our religion, they're going to start limiting what we can believe in. They're going to use our own faith against us. They're going to use, imagine if they could have wielded faith in order to enforce COVID.
Oh yeah.
Right. So those types of things are what we have to be careful of. And what you're talking about 150 years ago, or 150 years prior to the founding of the country. Yeah, they saw it. They saw it in person.
They had relatives that lived through it. So they saw the horrors and they realized we can never allow the government to be in charge of any religion. We can never allow any religion to be in charge of this government. If we do, it's only a matter of time before bad people get in there. And holy cow, just wait until you see the atrocities that are going to show up.
Exactly.
So, and this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, and you brought up COVID, and I think it's very apt. If COVID in the last 2 years did not bring Republicans over to the Libertarian Party, I don't know what they're waiting for. People need to wake up. It is insane to me that people did not get fed up with the Republican Party across the board. So the idea is religion and science must be completely independent of government interference and control. And what's going on is that the government is trying to get involved with both. So the government came in and they shut down churches, and the government came in and they started telling doctors, you're not allowed to say this, you have to say that.
Right.
And both of those things are absolutely insane to me. that they would go on. But that's exactly what we experienced over the last 2 years. And we can see that the result was horrible. As soon as the government gets involved in religion or science, then those things become politicized and they become perverted.
Yep.
And they're used against people. And unfortunately, it makes it so that religion cannot be used for what it's supposed to be used for, and science cannot accomplish what it's supposed to be used for.
Right.
And they both became political tools. And I hate to say this, but I'm going to. I don't believe any doctor that I see on TV anymore.
Oh, yeah.
I've been lied to by so many of them so many times over the last couple of years that for me, it's like, and I was telling people this because, you know, I took a hard line as far as COVID. I was
Right.
like, I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not doing the distancing. I'm not doing anything. I don't care who you are. I don't care the business. I don't care anything. You can call the police and have me kicked out. I am done with this. I am sick of all of you. And it was not a very, you know, I'm not even going to say it. It wasn't a very helpful, accommodating, you know, attitude, but I didn't care. And when people would confront me on it, I was like, look, I've been lied to by politicians, by doctors, by scientists for so long that this was my feeling. You guys lost this one.
Yeah.
It's over. Nobody believes you. No one's going to believe you. It doesn't matter what you say when we've been lied to this many times. Forget it. Try to build the trust back and maybe we'll believe you on the next one. But as far as this one goes, I've had enough.
I really like the fact that you compare science to religion, because let's take COVID, same thing, a disease going rampant, but instead of us taking our direction from science and these science, these government propped up science institutions, we took all of our direction from government propped up religious institutions.
Sure.
Right? Okay. So immediately people start dying, people start getting really sick, and they start blaming it on, you know, well, you're just not faithful enough. You need to go to church more. In fact, we're going to make everyone go to church, and we're going to make people go to church not only Sunday, but we're going to make them go on Wednesday. Well, we know how COVID spreads, right?
Sure.
So that would have made things way worse. You know, and it, you know, that same concept, right, of us just blindly following a I don't want to call science a theocracy, right?
Sure.
But just blindly following, you know, a system that's designed to educate the population, and using it as or using the government to wield that education and whap people over the head with it is dangerous. And that's exactly what we saw is science could have been our friend, right? It could have been, you know, it could have said, hey, listen, this virus is too small. You know, it can be good at maybe stopping some droplets here and there, which might help.
Sure.
But it's not going to protect you. You'd need an N95 mask in order to do that. And then even at that, you're going to get it on your hands and everything. Yeah. It's not feasible, right? You know, and then said, you know, this might be our recommendation. This is what, you know, you could do. You can make sure that grandma stays home and make sure that she gets the stuff that she needs. And if you've been around anybody that's been infected, make sure that you don't go around grandma, right?
Yeah.
You know, we could have been educated by it. Same way that we should be getting educated by faith, right? And that should be everyone, right? We should be learning and growing in faith. And then, you know, on the education side, we need to be learning and growing in our education with science, math, and everything else, right? So that's, and again, when it comes to government, you know, that's why the Constitution exists. That's why it's so limited. And that's why it's so important to put the shackles on government. So that way it can't be wielded by whatever institution, science or religious, to violate people's rights.
Yeah. As soon as the government gets involved with one of those institutions that it is clearly supposed to stay out of, it politicizes it, it perverts it, and then we lose our trust in that institution.
Yeah.
It never ever helps. Let's just face it, the federal government is a dumpster fire.
Any centralized power like that large, in charge of 380 million people and a geography that covers, you know, man, like what, a 16th of the world or whatever it's going to be. I mean, that's a giant power. Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to be corrupt. It's going to be a dumpster fire.
Okay. So let's talk, let's get into this. So I wanted to go, because here is one of the sticking points that I want to get into concerning libertarianism and Christianity and one of the hurdles. Okay, so give me a little bit of latitude. Let me read just a couple of lines of George Washington's farewell address, and then we'll kind of get into the question that I think needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
George Washington said, "Of all the dispositions and habits which led to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that natural morality can prevail to the exclusion of a religious principle." So the issue, and we both agreed that the way America was set up was to be for a religious and moral people. Okay, so and keep in mind, people can be a religious. That's fine. In America, you're allowed to be an atheist. You're allowed to be an agnostic. The problem is we still need the morality side with the agnostic or the atheist. So what it comes down to in the Libertarian Party is, where do we derive that morality from? Okay, so is divine law where we get our code of morality from? And if not, where does it originate?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. This is actually a topic that I briefly touched on with a Facebook comment recently. I think Tulsi Gabbard posted something out there about basically that, like, where God is directs us morally, the law of nature, and nature's God, and something to that effect. I can't remember the exact quote. And I saw a friend's comment underneath and say, I disagree with you on this one thing, because God has no purpose in directing human life. Right. So obviously, my friend wasn't very religious.
Since that's God's whole idea.
Right. And he was talking about the role of government and those sorts of things. And I said, you don't have to be a religious person to understand that there are certain rights that are inherent. Oh yeah, that's right. Tulsi Gabbard was recognizing the fact that rights are given by God, not by government.
Sure.
Right. And he was saying, no, that my rights are not given to me by any supernatural being.
So, okay, first off, he is diametrically opposed to the Declaration of Independence, because it talks about that our rights are endowed by our Creator.
Right.
Okay. So if you don't believe that, where does your friend land on right and wrong?
And I don't know personally for him, but
Sure.
But I said, what my response to him was, you don't have to be religious to understand that rights are inherent. And us as religious people, we see anything inherent as provided to us by God, right?
Because He's the Creator.
Right.
Okay.
And so if you are, and this is actually the founders talked about it. They use the term the law of nature and nature's God, meaning it's the what we see in nature. There's a certain law that goes to it, where we understand that killing is wrong, taking people's stuff is wrong. Now, I would argue that we as Christians believe that in Adam and Eve, like, this goes all the way back to Genesis, right? God was telling Adam and Eve every single day, this is what you do, this is what you don't do, blah, 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 blah. They had free will, but like, he was telling them what was good and evil the entire time. And then we ate from the forbidden fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Right. And what that gave us was a certain degree of arrogance, right? That made us think, well, God doesn't necessarily have to tell us what's good and evil. We can discern that ourselves. But even today, regardless of whether or not you're a Christian or Hindu or Buddhist or not religious at all, you can have a group of people on an island grow up without any outside influence or any injection of God, and there will still be that same set of rules provided by the law of nature and nature's God that was inherent from us, from our creation, from our Creator, of do not kill, do not steal, and basically liberty. Anything that's taken from you without due process is wrong. And so even for those people that aren't necessarily religious, it's inherent in us, and I don't know, they have to figure out where that inheritance comes from.
Okay, so let me be the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Why is murder wrong?
because we have those inherent rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? Yeah, no,
So, but bear with me. Is it wrong for the cat to kill the mouse?
Yeah, no, I see your point, right? So it wouldn't be, and same thing, I like hunting.
Sure,
right?
So do I. Yep.
Would it be wrong for me to go out and kill an elk and
eat it?
Leave it?
Okay.
Because you're a hunter, right?
Yeah.
And I think both of us would agree. If I go out there and I kill an elk, I'm like, oh yeah, that was cool, and I leave it behind. Is
Sure.
that wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say it's terrible. It's wasteful. It's going to, seriously affect the elk population if everyone did that just for sport.
Right.
Okay. There are going to be plenty of turkey vultures and coyotes that are going to be happy.
Sure.
But the fact is, way too many elk are going to be killed, and that's terrible. So, as far as I'm concerned, yes. But keep in mind, even this is going back to my biblical belief. The Bible says there are reasons why killing an animal is acceptable. And these aren't as explicit as the 10 Commandments and thou shalt not steal. But the Bible says you are allowed to kill animals to eat them. You are allowed to kill animals to protect yourself. You are allowed to kill animals to produce food and to sell that to someone else and to use the wool to make clothes. You're allowed to do all of these things because God said that they are there for us. God also said we are their stewards. So we're supposed to take care of them, and we are supposed to make sure that we do not waste the elk by just going out and shooting them like it's a video game or something. Okay, so it's okay for the cat to kill the mouse. It's okay for the coyote to hunt the rabbit. Okay, why is it not okay for me to kill somebody that I don't like?
And I'm pretty sure that this is actually one of those questions that's asked in like year one of law school, right? Because it is like where this is our foundation of our laws and stuff, and us Christians, we're able to hit that easy button because it's easy for us. God says it's wrong, right?
But I'm not a Christian in this scenario.
Right.
I'm the devil's advocate, and I'm asking, and I don't believe that there's a creator.
Yeah.
Therefore, if there's no creator and there's no set of morals and rules that I have to abide by, then evolution dictates that I have the right to kill a weaker species. I hate to say it, but this idea is where Pol Pot got his initiative. This is where Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler and, the CCCP, currently, that's why they are rounding up people and working them as slaves and killing them to harvest
all you have to do is dehumanize
organs in order to sell them to, rich people in China. So the whole idea is, if there is no creator, then there's a really good case to be made for slavery. There's a really good case to be made for genocide. There's a really good case to be made for, And
I think you're right. So I think, if you're not religious and you don't have any base in your values in religion, you've got one of two choices. You can either recognize the inherent rights and without trying to explain it, right? Or you're going to go down this deep end, right, where it's going to go for a tit for tat. Well, I wouldn't want somebody else to kill me, so we're all going to have this moral law of not killing each other, and eventually it's such a loose footwork that we actually see this where we're talking about population control, right? We're talking about just to help out the environment for the greater good, utilitarianism of it. Well, it doesn't matter about the individual so much as long as the greater good benefits. Those are major problems because
those are talking points of Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf. That's what they did. They didn't start with Jews and boxcars.
Exactly.
They started with the mentally retarded, the physically handicapped in hospitals because it was a drain on the state. That's where it started.
Right.
It was doctors, not the SS, that were executing people in Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Doctors started the executions.
Right. And that's such a good point too.
So what's the problem with that?
Right. And that's the thing.
If there's no God, there is no problem.
Right.
And what did we get to after the war was done? And, we put the Nazis on trial. What did they come up with? Go ahead.
All right. So
I actually, Nuremberg defense?
No. I'm going to get out the 2 Timothy because I just heard this today. 2 Timothy. It was like 8. It was like the last. the last chapter, and I'll try and make this quick.
It's okay. I hate to tell you, there's no chapter 8 in 2 Timothy.
Or,
but
yeah,
that's
no, there
okay.
isn't. You're right. Maybe I'm thinking.
Here's another politician trying to sound
right.
Christian.
No. No, chapter 8. Yeah, it's four chapters, right? But it was the
Don't
last
worry.
chapter. All right. I know
Go
a little bit. No, I'm like I said, I'm still exploring my faith here.
Yeah.
So it's the part on where he said, in the end times,
Mm-hmm.
and he's warning us. Oh, maybe it was 3. Evil people and imposters will become worse, deceiving and being deceived. I'm sorry. But tisk. So anyway, it was basically talking about how he was warning Timothy, saying, in the end times, people are going to be so self-indulged,
Yep.
right? And they're going to say the words, but they're going to fall short of actually the word of God and believing the word of God. And I think that's exactly kind of what you're talking about is the world has become really self-indulged, where we forget the meaning of life, where we don't care about the meaning of life as long as it, is perpetuating, right? So we get the people that, as long as I'm not killing somebody else, they're not going to kill me, and we all live in this happy Disneyland world. And that's their morals for not wanting to kill. That's their morals for not wanting to steal is treat others as you'd want to be treated, essentially.
And that's
the golden
great.
rule.
I think that's great that they feel that way.
But it's such
I'm
a
going
weak
to kill
foundation. Right. It's such a weak foundation because they will be the first ones to say, well, maybe those people will let die.
Okay. So what we're getting into, and this is the problem that I have, and I would love to debate a libertarian one time on this, because what they are getting down to is moral relativism.
Yeah.
They are saying that I don't feel this is right. Well, that's fine. But understand that in Iran, they're okay with taking homosexuals and throwing them off the roof of tall buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In Afghanistan, they're okay with taking women who have been, or girls that have been educated beyond the age of 8 and killing them and their families.
Right.
So you have to understand that there are groups of people where I understand that you have a pretty civilized view, even though you don't derive your morals from the Bible, but we all have to find our moral code from somewhere. And there are some pretty bad people that don't have one. Now, in the, what was it? The Nuremberg defense, or the, they said we were just following orders, we weren't doing anything wrong. And they said, sorry, you can't use that as a defense. There is a law higher than the German Supreme Court, and we are all bound by it.
And actually the Nuremberg trials is really interesting too, because it does show the inherent capacity we all have to just be pursued to violate our core principles, and I think that honestly is what the founders were leading to the most. Was they said, these people have to be moral, religious, and they probably didn't say it, but principled. Yeah. Because if you're not, you're just going to cave in on it, and you're just going to let all these principles that we're putting down in this document, and you're just going to throw them away. And I had something else, and I was going to say it. And I can't remember now, but
that's all right. Yeah. Let me jump in with this. This is a writing from Benjamin Franklin. So this was the fundamental points to be taught in schools. This is what Benjamin Franklin came up with that was going to be good for America and necessary for everybody to understand. Now, please keep in mind, I am 100% against public schools. I hate public schools more than I hate communism. Okay. I think they should be gotten rid of immediately. But let's go with what Benjamin Franklin was saying. If we have to have them, I think these 5 points should be taught. Number 1, there exists a creator who made all things, and mankind should recognize and worship him. Number 2, the creator has revealed a moral code of behavior for happy living, which distinguishes right from wrong. Number 3, the creator holds mankind responsible for the way they treat each other. Number 4, all mankind live beyond this life. And number 5, in the next life, mankind are judged for their conduct in this one. Now, even when you read through that, and when you learn about Benjamin Franklin, he was not the most ardent Christian. He wasn't a
Mhm.
Christian at all. He never, I've never read anything where he's claimed to be, although, I do find him quoting a lot more of the Bible than
Yeah.
a lot of other people. And when you look at that, he's not even pushing Christianity. He is pushing the idea that there must be a creator, and therefore that creator gets to decide right and wrong, which gives us a reason for natural law. Natural law makes sense if there's a creator. If there's no creator, all of a sudden, I ask people, you have to define natural law and where it comes from.
Right.
And why is natural law different for the cat and the coyote than it is for Patrick Hayes?
Right. And again, I think that's, so two things there. I would say with Benjamin Franklin on that quote, I agree with Benjamin Franklin that every child should learn that.
Yeah.
However, I go back to that same thing. If I give the schools the power to do that, I think that should be taught by churches. I think that should be taught by parents. But I think you start giving public schools that ability. Now, where instead of being taught, well, the creator this and the creator that, it's going to be, the
next step is give the creator a name. And then we're
right. Or you start allowing the schools to start dictating values and morals. And we can see what the public schools doing right now. Are they teaching our kids the morals and values that most parents agree with? No, they're not. It's right. Insane. So I'm glad you said it. Public schools shouldn't be really that involved in our kids if they should exist at all. Yeah. Now, I did want to talk on the extremes. So when you start to lose grasp of something solid on where the good and evil comes from, and when it comes to libertarians, what you're probably going to find is they're going to say, well, so this is why I'm actually an anarchist, right? And they're going to start talking about how the reason why most laws are caused are because the institutions and institutional structures and they'll go on and on about how murder is actually going to be extremely rare, if we ever have an anarchy, and they'll go on about that kind of stuff. Because when you start losing grasp and you start relying on moral relativism, then you start going to the extremes of anarchy, or you start going to extremes of, well, we got to control everything because our personal view on good and bad is the only thing that matters. Yeah, that's why it's so important. I agree with you that we be a society that does believe in a creator, that does believe in some sort of ultimate power.
There has to be a foundation where we derive our moral code.
Yeah.
And there really is for everybody. Some people don't want to admit it, and I understand that because there are implications that they don't like with that. But that's the question that keeps coming up, because you have to understand that is going to be one of the foundational principles we're going to keep coming back to when we ask, what of God's laws must be enforced by the government?
Yeah. So, I would say no more than the 10 Commandments.
I would even argue that. I don't think the 10 Commandments should be enforced by.
Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah, I'm fine with that one.
Yeah.
But how do you do, I'm the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me?
No,
All
I
of a
agree.
sudden, you made it Christian. So how about this? Can I start with this idea to answer the question, how many of God's laws must be enforced by a government? The answer is as few as possible.
Well, sure, as few as possible to protect our rights, our inherent rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay, so let me give you...
That's the big thing, right? Is protecting human rights.
100%. Now, we're going to go over. You don't have to. You're not on a hard clock, right?
No.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I want to keep going with this thought rather than having you back for. I mean, I'd like to have you back again to talk about more stuff.
Sure.
But I'd like to finish this point. Okay, so I want to give you an idea here, because when I talked to a lot of Christians, I had one of them answer and say, well, the 10 Commandments. And my first question was, are you saying that the government should force people to believe in only one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And he's like, well, so you can see the problem right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me give you this idea. We should have the government enforce laws pertaining to those sins that take away the life, liberty, and property of another person.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything that I do that takes away from your life, liberty, and property has to be stopped.
Yes.
Okay. Anything outside of that is where Christians have a hard time.
Yes. And,
Okay.
and that's where we start blurring the line
Yes.
between man's law
Yes.
and God's moral
law.
code.
Yes. And this is what I want to talk about. Okay. So when we look in the Bible, the question here is, and I know you have given the caveat, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I'm
Right.
going to ask you some Bible questions here anyhow, and we'll see how you do.
Okay.
So does the Bible forbid drunkenness?
No, I don't believe so. In fact, I've read certain passages that where very biblical people have been drunk.
No. We're not saying have people been drunk.
Right.
We're asking, does God forbid drunkenness? We're not asking the question, does God forbid the consumption of alcohol?
Sure.
We're asking, is there a line where God says, do not be drunk?
I think that's where you come into the concept of gluttony.
Uh-huh.
Right. Because if you're drinking enough to get drunk, then obviously you're being gluttonous about your intake.
And let me just
I don't know if there's anything explicit on
no,
drunkenness.
that's okay. And I can quote the verse. So it says, be not drunk with wine, but whereas in excess, but be filled. Something about the Holy Spirit. Forgive me. So I wasn't thinking I'd have to bring up the verse, otherwise I would have put it down. But here's the idea. Let's just agree that God forbids drunkenness. We're not going to argue whether God says you can or cannot drink, okay? But we'll say that there is a line where God says, this is too much, and I don't want you to do any more of that, okay? Now, the question after that is drunkenness punishable in the Bible? So God makes up laws all the way from Genesis all the way to, Revelation, where God says, do this, don't do that. And God gives punishments for these things. Drunkenness is forbidden in the Bible, but God does not punish drunkenness anywhere in the Bible. There's not a penalty for it. What there is a penalty for your actions while you are drunk.
Okay.
So if while you're drunk, you happen to kill somebody, destroy their property, yada, 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 you are held accountable for that. In the same way, I don't believe there should be any law against drunkenness. I do believe that there should be laws that prohibit the actions of people when they're drunk. Okay, yes, you cannot. It's not okay for you to be drunk in public and throw up in my restaurant.
Right.
It's not okay for you to be drunk and get in a motor vehicle and run over somebody. But I always bring up the same idea of the seatbelt law. It's the easiest one, or the motorcycle helmet law. I am 100% and will always be 100% against motorcycle helmet laws.
Yeah.
I understand you should wear a helmet, and I don't own a motorcycle. I have in the past. And when I would ride, I would wear a helmet because I wanted to be safe in case there was an accident.
Sure.
But there is no reason that I should have to force you to wear a helmet. If you end up in an accident, it's not going to affect the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of anyone else on earth if you sustain greater injuries or death because you did not have a helmet. Now, do we have to say that there should be a helmet law for kids under 18 if they're riding with their mom or dad? Okay, I understand that. Whether you want to debate it, that's fine. But the idea that, in the same way, I don't allow my 7-year-old to decide what he's going to eat every day because he would eat candy all day long and not brush his teeth. So I make decisions for him. And I think, I don't have a problem with a seatbelt law for children or a helmet law for children. But for anyone that's allowed, we're going to say there's a line where, guess what? You get to determine whether you're going to have nicotine. You're going to determine whether you're going to have alcohol. You're going to determine whether you're going to join the military. You're going to determine everything in your life. We are no longer considering you children anymore. Guess what? You don't have to wear a helmet.
Yeah.
I don't care what state it is. It's a ridiculous idea. Now, I think it's smart to do so. I also think it's smart not to drink 32 ounces of soda every time you go to lunch. But guess what? The state of New York does not have the right to tell you it's illegal.
Yeah. And that's where, God's moral code is. Now, okay, so I've got a little bit to talk about here.
Go for it.
So,
I threw a lot at you. Jump on in.
All right. So 2 things here. So hopefully I can remember both of them. All right. So the first one is when you're talking about crimes committed while drunk. That is the I would argue exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That when you're drunk and you commit a crime,
Mhm.
that there should be a weighted system, right?
Mhm.
So that says, well, yeah, you did this crime, and
Mhm.
because you can't control your alcohol, and because you lose your inhibitions when you're drunk,
Mhm.
we're going to punish you significantly, because it's likely you're going to do it again next time you get drunk.
Sure.
Now, similarly, do you believe that hate speech is a crime? No. But
no way.
if
there's no such thing as hate speech,
right. Well, so
or a hate crime.
Let's say
Mhm.
I commit murder and I murder someone because of the color of their skin.
Sure.
Is that more wrong than murdering somebody because I hate them?
No.
Why not?
Because it is the taking of the life that is the crime.
So
here's the idea.
there's no multiplier there. So when you're drunk,
Yeah.
So when you're drunk and you commit crimes, so we also shouldn't put multipliers on that. Just in the same way as you shouldn't put a multiplier on if they do it because of hate. Now,
Okay,
I
so
would say
first of all, the question that has to come up is, how do you know the murderer killed this guy because he was black, because he was gay, because he was short, because he liked Italian food? How do you know?
Yeah.
It's impossible to come up with that. That's the reason.
Unless you have evidence.
Sure.
Right.
And even if you had evidence that, it was a hate crime, guess what? When he killed the guy, it was a pretty good bit of evidence that he hated him.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. Okay, so but it would be different, if I killed my neighbor because he kept trespassing on my lawn and I or doing something and I just didn't like him, right? The reason why I would say that the multiplier should exist.
In what case?
I would say probably more so in the hate speech than the drunkenness.
Okay.
Because if I know that there's somebody out there that murdered a black guy just because he was black, we give him 25 years. He's 20 years old. When he gets out at 45 years, right, he is going to do the same thing, right? Because his that hate's still there, right?
Yeah,
his racism's still there.
But you and I have a different stance on the penalty that should be exacted on murder. And because of that, in my scenario, it doesn't matter, because guess what?
He's getting the death penalty.
He's getting the death penalty. He doesn't come back after 25 years. For me, and you got to understand, this is another one that you and I debated before, and we can talk about it another day.
Yeah.
I do not think there should be jails or prisons.
Yeah.
And I know people that are listening are like, what are you talking about, Patrick? And this is what I would challenge every one of my listeners to do. Find one jail or one prison in God's system of punishment anywhere. Don't tell me that Paul was in prison. Those weren't God's prisons. Those were Roman prisons.
Yeah.
But find a jail or a prison anywhere in God's system of justice. It didn't exist.
But see, you're also talking about two different things. We're again talking about God's moral code versus man's law. Right now, in God's moral code, there wasn't even a real system of government until Moses assigned the judges, right? And even at that, it was not judges to assign God's moral, or these judges weren't dictated to enforce man's law. They were dictated to judge on God's moral code, right?
But you got to remember, we're also talking about a situation where there was a theocracy. So it was different than any government we've ever seen before. When you read through the Bible and you read about the laws in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and when the Jews get into the promised land in the book of Joshua, and all through the book of Judges, the judges literally had a direct access to God. The way that it read was when Moses came down to something, he's like, man, I don't know what to do about this. He's like, okay, everyone, wait a second. Hey, God, what do you think I should do with this? And then God's like, oh, well, with this one, you should do it like this. Okay, thanks, God. Hey, everyone, listen up. This is what we're going to do. That doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
What I am saying is that the way that God judges things is going to be perfect and better than the way we do.
Yes.
And the way God set it up is there is a group of crimes where God said they are so bad that we are no longer going to deal with custodial sentencing. What we're going to do is we're going to put them away, and they are going to die, and they're going to die a gruesome, horrible public death. And therefore, guess what? People aren't going to kidnap anymore.
Yeah.
That was the goal. So for me, the idea is if there is premeditated murder, which is different than manslaughter in the Bible, because the Bible covers manslaughter, and that is not a capital crime. Okay. Manslaughter is, by definition, there was an accident. You were chopping wood and you pull the axe back and the head flies off and it hits your neighbor and they go unconscious and they're in a coma and then they die a week later. That's manslaughter.
Right. And God even said that that's not even punishable by death. In fact, there are certain protections that God put in place that said make a city that these people can go to.
So they can be protected until, okay. So, but understand, when we're talking about premeditated murder, I'm not concerned about the motive. I'm concerned about where the pile of rocks are. Okay, that's all I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point. I think the other thing I also want to bring up was you brought up the kids wearing helmets.
Yeah.
So that falls into child endangerment. The thing I hate the most is over redundant laws, right? Where we make laws.
We have multiple laws that cover.
So that's the thing I hate the most, right?
Like the 10th and the 14th and Have you ever looked through when you get into, there are multiple amendments to the Constitution that give women rights to a certain degree, and it's like, how many times are we going to rewrite that, guys? Like, anyway, go ahead.
No. So actually, I have a funny story on that a little bit later too. Let's say you're driving down the road.
Endangerment, helmet laws. Go for it.
So let's say you're driving down the road on your motorcycle with your kid on the back, and you say, you know what, kid, you don't need to wear a motorcycle, right? I don't believe that there should be a law that says that your kid has to wear one, because if you get in a car wreck and your kid dies, right? We start talking about manslaughter, right? What were your actions leading up to this incident? Were you driving irresponsibly and so on, right? And one of the questions is going to be, were you responsible for that human being and responsible for the protection, the guidance, and so on, the instruction of that human being? And if you were, did you provide the adequate guidance and protection for that human being? And if you didn't, now you're responsible for child endangerment, right? So that law already exists, right? So requiring your child to have a helmet on, I don't feel like is necessary, because here's the thing, Dad, here's the thing, Mom, if your child dies because you were negligent, you now get a multiplier onto your whatever sentence, because child death in result of child endangerment is a huge thing, right? So that's my little take on it. I think we get really into the weeds, especially about passing more complicated laws with ear tags and everything. When it comes to, we got to make sure that you're wearing a helmet, because you might put somebody else in danger, or you might hike up somebody's interest rates or insurance rates, right? We start getting that indirect, relation to people.
And I'm not a fan. I don't care that it affects you. Effect is different from taking your rights away.
Right.
And that's why you can go ahead and eat a stick of butter for lunch every day, and I don't care. It's like, well, that's going to make healthcare more expensive for everyone. Okay, well, guess what? Then we should outlaw stupid people,
right?
But we're not gonna.
If we let the private insurance companies do their thing, right?
Boy, here we go.
Yeah, I know, right? So, I'm a healthy. Let's say my family's a bunch of healthy people. We run all the time. We take our health seriously, right? We're probably going to find an insurance company that takes that kind of stuff seriously. So that way I'm not having to pay for people's, heart conditions caused by, poor exercise and stuff. Right. And, some other people who, maybe aren't as are concerned with that diet and exercise, they don't qualify for those insurance companies. So they're going to have to pay for their own habits, because they're paying for it through other people that are doing the same thing as them. Right. So, the market, here's the thing, right? When we start talking about God and God's influence and the invisible hand and stuff like that, it's weird, because it seems like if you just let the market do its thing, it works out, right? If you start getting the government involved in the market, things don't work out the way they should, right? Same thing with, religion and morals. If you just let people's morals, if you make people realize that, hey, no one's going to tell so-and-so down the road not to wrong you, as long as it's not, violating your rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So maybe you all should come to an agreement that we're all going to find a moral code that we're going to follow. And maybe that moral code is Christianity, and maybe it's Islam, maybe it's, whatever, but the free market of ideas, right? Free market of philosophy is ultimately going to establish that moral code. And I'm a Christian. I believe that is the way, right? And that is the way of righteousness. And I'm going to show people that is the way through my actions.
Okay. So I'm going to try to rein this conversation and get it back to the idea. So we started with the idea of drunkenness, the punishment for it. Yeah. And even though God says it's bad, we should not have a law against that act. The same idea is nobody is going to believe that smoking cigarettes is good for us, right? Sure. I mean, is anyone making that argument?
Yeah.
Nobody is. but we should not make it illegal. Okay.
Yeah.
The government shouldn't be involved with it. So what you get down to, here's the problem with Christians and government. Most of them want the government to enforce the way they feel, rather than principles. And what we have today is a government that is run off of how people feel on both sides of the aisle. And you go into crazy, weird, over-the-top areas of laws being made to enforce someone's rathers instead of going off of a principle. So for me, I am 100% against drug use.
Yeah.
Okay. 100% against it. I teach my kids you shouldn't do drugs. I'm a recovering drug addict. My kids know that. My wife knows that. All my fans know that. Both of my fans know that. Okay. So I tell people you should not do drugs. And I tell my kids you shouldn't do drugs because you're going to like it.
Mm-hmm.
And the odds are, you're going to do it more than you should. It's going to be bad for your health. It'll cause things to happen in your life that you don't want. With that being said, I don't think that we should have laws against smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
And I know a Christian saying that, there are people going, oh, I can't believe that. That's unbelievable. You got to remember, we are either going to say God's law is going to be the government's way, or we're going to say God's law pertains to God's followers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the government and the laws it enforces are only going to be those that rob someone else of their life, liberty, and their pursuit of happiness or their property, whichever way you want to go. The problem people have is that philosophy is going to cause the government to not prosecute certain behaviors that people would rather their friends and family and neighbors not do.
Right.
But you have to understand, if the government doesn't give us those freedoms, then sooner or later, they are going to come for your freedoms that you like, including the religion that you appreciate being able to be free to exercise and follow. So we have to allow people to make poor decisions. We have to allow people to make wrong decisions. People have to be legally free to make the wrong religious decision.
100%.
They have to be free to say, there is no God. I came from a monkey. I share a common heritage with an earthworm. And there is, no moral code that I have to follow.
I think it's really important for Christians to recognize, government is not God.
Yes.
Right. And we are right now giving government the power of God.
Yes.
Right. And that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, don't be a lazy Christian. Mm-hmm. Right. If you see, I've got teenagers, right. And I hate seeing them go down the wrong path.
Sure.
Right. But I am not going to, my thing is I'm going to be an active Christian, an active Christian father, and I'm going to do everything in my power to steer them in the right way, even though some of those things that they're doing isn't even necessarily illegal. It's just a really dumb idea.
Correct.
Right. I'm going to do my part and be an active Christian father and give them guidance, and they will roll their eyes and they will hate me for it. I don't care. Right. But that is, that's the thing, is if you don't like seeing your friends and loved ones going down that path, be an active Christian and do something.
Yeah. But we cannot ask the government to force our children, our neighbors, our family, our friends, our coworkers to change their behaviors every time we don't like them. And the fact is, we might be wrong, even though we don't like it. Or even when we know that the behaviors of, those around us are bad for them, we don't have the right to enact the government to force them to get in line with what we believe or everything that God says. People have, if we do not allow speech that we find detestable, and there's a lot of it out there, then guess what? We are not going to be able to have a Christian podcast, because other people, if you go to Canada, do you know that you are not allowed to teach or preach on anything publicly? You're not allowed to talk about anything negative concerning homosexuality. You're not even allowed to read a Bible verse that condemns it in your church. That is Canada right now.
Well, with the law banning conversion therapy,
Mhm.
it's so vaguely worded and so vaguely ruled on that it's not going to be long where your sermon is going to be viewed as conversion therapy.
Absolutely. You're not allowed to speak against any of these ideas. So that's what's going to happen if we give the government the power to restrict things that even the things that we know are wrong, they have to be legally permissible. Otherwise, we're just waiting for a group to get into power where they flip the coin. They're like, well, now we think what you do and say and believe is bad, so therefore we're going to make it illegal.
A good point to sum that up is during the 2016 election, 2020 election, everyone was saying, if Trump gets elected or reelected, it's going to be the end of the world. And it's on the opposite side, if Hillary or Biden gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world. Here's an idea. If you think that one person getting in power in that one seat is going to be the end of the world, maybe they have too much power.
Yeah, then there's a bigger problem at hand.
Right. And I think people need to recognize that is, again, I keep saying it. Government's not God, but we've given it the power of God. And when the people that you don't like are now in power, they're going to put all those things that you were wielding against you.
Absolutely. I always tell people, and I use this oftentimes in a Second Amendment argument, but I'll use it in any argument. We need to limit the power of the government so much, and the way we know when it's enough and we can stop is when the government fears me. When IRS agents fear me, right? When my governor fears me, when my local sheriff fears me, when the district attorney fears me, when the president and the senators, when they all fear me, the individual citizen, then I know that we have gotten them down to the size that they're supposed to be.
So again, going back to the Anti-Federalist Papers, right? And so these are all the arguments that formed the first 10 amendments. The one that they were working on for the Second Amendment, it's huge. It's cheap, right? But
Go ahead. Read it. Take your time.
Okay, yeah. So that the people have a right to keep and bear arms, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of people trained to arms is proper, natural, and a safe defense of a free state, that standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty and therefore ought to be avoided as far as circumstances and protection of the community will admit, and that in all cases, the military, therefore the government, should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power or the civilian power. And what they mean by that is the civilian armed militia, the power of the people to be able to just overthrow their government and be like done for, right? And that's what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I think that we should have a model that is, I don't want to bring up other countries. I think we should have a model where the government actually provides us with arms and ammunition and training, every single civilian. And therefore, we all have the ability and the knowledge and the know-how to overthrow the government when they step out of line.
And so many people will argue that's what the National Guard is. And honestly, that's very true, except for the fact that the Patriot Act made it to where the federal government doesn't have to ask the permission of the governor
anymore
to activate the Guard. And so that kind of undercuts that. However, I think, as someone who's been in the military, I can tell you right now that I would rather see a civilian who is authorized to be as well armed as the average infantryman. And if you take Joe Biden's stance on, well, you'd have to have nuclear weapons to stand up against our government. Well, I don't know. There were some Afghanis that were standing up against the government with nothing more than an AK-47, and they did a lot of damage, right? And AK-47 and ammonium nitrate, right? So I mean, you don't sit here and tell me that you can't bring the world's power to its knees with an AR-15, an armed populace, because you can.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, so let me check on my notes here. So I wanted to go over an idea here, and this is going against libertarianism.
Okay.
And the way that it worked out was that the founders of this country believed in a free market, and they wanted the government to be completely hands off. I mean, they were fans of Adam Smith, in The Wealth of Nations, which is a book I would hope everyone would read. but they had 4 things where they said, look, we are going to violate our principles and our belief as far as the government being hands off in the market, except for these 4 areas where we feel that if we do not have laws and rein it in, severe destruction is going to come. Okay, so you ready for this? So they came up with number 1, illegal force in the marketplace to compel purchase or sale of products. The government was going to say, we are going to step in anytime private industry forces you to purchase or sell any products.
When you say force, you mean by physical force?
By physical force or through coercion. Okay, the idea where we don't care that you only want the internet. Okay, you have to buy the internet and cable and a landline.
And how are you going to enforce that?
And a second, landline for a fax machine with the government.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's the idea, is keep in mind that they are talking about, we are going to give the government power, okay, to regulate the free market, which we think should be hands off in these 4 areas, because if we don't, okay, there can be private industry that will be able to abuse people. The second one is fraud. Okay, fraud and misrepresenting the quality, location, ownership, or item being sold or bought. All right. The third one is monopoly, and this one is often debated, okay, which eliminates competition and results in restraint of trade. And then the fourth one is debauchery, where they said that the debauchery of the cultural standards and moral fiber of society by the commercial exploitation of vice. Pornography, obscenity, drugs, liquor, prostitution, and commercial gambling. And they said that we want to be able to regulate or make some of these things wholly illegal, because we have seen the degradation of societies to the point where we are willing to step in and go against our own principles in order to save the country.
Yeah. So the fourth one's hard, so I'll get to that one.
Yeah. And that's one that you brought up earlier and we were talking about. Yeah.
Because I'm borderline. Well, actually, I think on all of them, I'm pretty much going to disagree with the founders. So the first one was talking about using force or coercion in order to make you buy a product, right? No,
and the idea was that the private industry would force you to buy their products, and the government said, no, you can't do that.
Right. So the question I have is how is the private industry going to force you to buy it?
Oh, that's easy. That is going to be like Obamacare.
Okay. So they're going to wield the government.
In that case, yes.
Yeah. So, and any situation I can think of, they would have to wield the government or establish their own government within the free market, right? Which then at that point, it's not a free market anymore. So you can,
when it gets down to a monopoly.
And so I was going to talk about monopolies.
So the monopoly is the one that would have some overlap, because let's say in your area, you only have one industry, and that industry is whatever Spectrum, or that industry is Comcast, or whatever the,
provider is.
And they say, okay, well, in this area where we have no competition, we're going to say that you have to buy this bundle, even though you want this one service, and we can easily do it, but we're not gonna, because it's going to be a lot more money for us.
Now, so we covered that the first one has to be enforced without the monopoly part, has to be enforced through government.
Sure.
Okay. The second one was what?
Fraud.
Okay. So
the government is going to ensure that fraud cannot take place.
So what's the difference between fraud and theft?
Fraud is just one form of theft.
Right. So we've already established that theft is in violation of your pursuit of happiness, arguably maybe your liberty, right? So that's already illegal. We can establish that that's not even in violation of the list of laws that the government is allowed to enforce.
The difference is that theft is overt and fraud is covert.
Sure, but it's still illegal. If I covertly steal from you for many years and you're just really bad with your money and don't realize I'm stealing all your money, it's still theft.
Sure.
Right. So I think, enforcing fraud doesn't go against their principles. I think, so then when we get to monopolies, and this one's, again, hotly debated.
Yes.
Because why is Spectrum the only thing that people can buy?
I don't know. I'll say because every other service we don't like, and everyone's giving their money to them because they have a superior product. Okay, so that's one option.
So most of the time when you have one provider of utility of some kind, it's because the local municipality, county, or state has signed a contract with that provider that says that you get to have this area. This is your area.
Sure. But the idea is, and this came from the idea of, Carnegie and what's his name? I forget the other one.
Pinkertons and all that.
No, there's the steel guy and there's the Rockefeller and Carnegie. Okay, so what would happen is they would go into towns and they would buy 9 of the 12 gas stations, and they would lower the price enough to starve out the last 3, and then they would just shut them down, and then they would jack up the price. And the idea is that once you get big enough, you can actually do unethical practices in order to eliminate your competition instead of doing fair trade.
So there's actually a good, and it's been a while since I've touched on this, so I'm a little bit unprepared, but so the deal on Rockefeller isn't completely true. That's something that we are, told growing up in public school, that Rockefeller was the most evil man in the world. When in fact, the opposite is probably true. Yeah, he was able to make it to where competition was stiff, but he also revolutionized oil industry altogether. Okay, right?
But wait a minute. If you're going to tell me that he was not a monster, okay, I'm going to challenge that, because he had to come up with, he was one of the first guys to come up with an endowment, because no charity would take a check with his name on it. That's how evil the guy was. He had to come up with a shell corporation to give away his money to charities.
So what was he doing that was so evil?
Okay, he was fine with eliminating anyone that stood in his way for the purpose of success in his business.
Was he giving them money to buy them out? Was he providing people goods and services that would undercut the prices, right? So he would, what you're talking about is that he's lowering the prices enough that it would make it to where all small businesses would get driven out, right? So that's what's happening with Walmart even right now, right? Now, if he starts jacking his prices up, what's going to stop those small businesses from jumping back in the market?
Sure, they could. The problem is that small businesses like me, I'm a small business, I'm a single person, for the cost is so great to shut down and then to start up again that it would be, very difficult.
Sure.
Not to say that it couldn't happen.
And the theory is that there will be a cost that he can't raise above, because otherwise there will be people that can jump into the market. The thing is and again, this has been a while since I've touched on it. There's a good documentary on it, and it talks about Rockefeller and why he was painted as a monster. But he never did jack the prices up. That was a worry, that was a concern, and a lot of people were pissed off about it, but he never did actually jack up the prices from what I understand. And I'll have to check on that again, and maybe next time we record. So anyway, so the monopoly thing is hard, because for me, I have a hard time wrapping my head around a monopoly that can exist without some sort of government intervention to sustain that monopoly. Most of the time, they're going to crumble underneath themselves. And then lastly, that fourth one, where the founders said that they're going to undermine their principles to
limit the free market in the case of pornography, prostitution, these things. They said that it was going to be so degrading to a society, and they've seen it, that they said, we are going to support making these things illegal. And it's not going, obviously, we know it's not going to stop them.
Yeah.
Okay. But the idea was, the goal was, we're going to make it as hard as possible.
Yeah. So, and I think those kinds of laws create black market, which makes the crime industry even worse, right? It makes the result of the immoral implications worse, right? Now, I'm one of those people that says that I would like to have some sort of mechanism that would tamp down that kind of immorality. But I also am a man of God, and I believe that God does that himself. I've got a book that says that he does. Yeah. Right. I don't believe that enforcing morality, and even in that situation, is the role of government. I think that we should have a mechanism, and I think that is church.
So then, really what the government should be doing is protecting religious liberties at all costs, because they know that the result of that is good for the nation.
Yeah.
And they should foster an environment for those things to grow rather than an environment to stifle them at every turn.
Right.
And if our government changed gears and said, look, this is what we want to do, we know this is good, we're going to, and in the same way, you want to know what else is great for every society? Ready for this? A family.
Yeah.
Do you know that?
Absolutely.
A mom and a dad and kids that all live together and stay together and divorces don't happen. That is better for every society on earth. And insurance companies tell us that.
Yep.
They study that, and they say that a man that is married will live longer than a single man. A man that is married with a kid lives longer than a man that's married with no kids.
And I would argue too that it's not only just the immediate family.
Mhm.
I think the family community is something that we're lacking in a lot, right? I mean, you know, and my family is no different. You know, my parents live, you know, up in North Dakota, and the other grandparents are like an hour or two away. So like I get it, you know, it's hard, but having that extended family interaction with the grandkids, having aunts and uncles constantly, cousins and all that stuff, like that is a huge structure, a community structure. And we've always said it takes community to raise a kid, but then like what community, right? Or, well, I guess the computer game community, or like in the case of my oldest, it was the skate park community. And obviously it didn't work out the way like there were some morals that weren't taught at the skate park. Weird. Yeah. You know, and so I think it's, you know, we're missing a lot of that. And I think you're right. It starts with that nuclear family, but we need to start pushing even farther and start getting grandparents and uncles and aunts all working together again.
Yeah. So instead of trying to work against drugs and liquor and pornography and prostitution and commercial gambling, really the idea is we should have a country where we foster the good things, which is, we know that God is good for people. We know that morality is good for people. We know that all of these ideas are good. So anywhere we can, we are going to try to make it easy for them to exist. But instead we have a government that seems to fight it all the time. And you got to remember, allowing and encouraging those things, that is not the government picking a religion and forcing it on anyone. That's saying, look, we know that God is good for a community. And I'll be honest, and obviously this is coming as, you know, a pastor who believes in the Bible. You even find this in Hindu communities back east and on the West Coast, okay, where they are thriving, and where they have a lot of people in the community that are all able to get together. They have healthier families, they have smarter kids, they have less crime. Okay, it works the same way in the Christian communities. Okay, because we all believe that there is a God, there's a creator, there is a moral code, and it is important that we follow that.
Yes,
it is good for all those communities. They don't have to push one over the other. Yeah, what they do need to allow and encourage is the idea that these things are good, believing them is good, teaching them to your kids is good, having a day of the week, you know, to do these things is good. Excuse me. You know, being able to learn about these things is good, rather than forcing it down our throat that we are bad people if we believe our religion and it goes against a minority. Yeah. You know, and it's just such a shame because, and keep in mind, the idea that a pastor would say, you know what? Pornography has to be legal. Prostitution has to be legal. Yeah. The idea of hearing that is absurd to so many people. Yeah. The problem is people cannot see the relationship between pornography and the Bible. Yeah. Because as abhorrent as a Christian sees pornography, That's how abhorrent certain people view the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said is absolutely right. The best way that a government can improve the morality is to pave a way to allow that free exchange of thoughts of religion to get out there and prove those people wrong, that the Bible is not this god awful thing. That it's actually the moral guide of how you should live your life. This is the best way to enjoy this universe. Get out of the way. Government needs to get out of the way. Allow that to happen. Let the natural, the law of nature, nature's God, prosper, because it's going to happen. And biggest thing is stop pushing other morals, right? And so, and this is the thing, is not only is the government not enforcing the Bible, which is good, fine. They are enforcing other people's theocracy, right? And that's where, you said it before, you don't trust doctors that get on TV. Well, in the past few months, we've seen how the psychological community has messed up on depression. They've messed up on Alzheimer's. We saw the CDC came out and said, yeah, we messed up on COVID. The medical community has formed its own theocracy, and it's wielding the government to push its theocracy. And that's not to say that all of those things are bad and everything. It's just, what I'm saying is, because the medical community, the scientific community, I have a lot of faith in the scientific community. I believe in the scientific process, but we are seeing certain morals pushed. And I'm just going to say it: transgender community, the pronouns, all that stuff. It's being pushed under the science, or abortion is the science, right? Even though it's completely against the science. All that stuff's being pushed by the government, and it's a theocracy. That's all it is, right? And
it's a religious worldview, because what people they constantly get away from the scientific method, and it's like, guys, as soon as what you're talking about is not testable, demonstratable, replicatable, and disprovable, there has to be a way to disprove it. Otherwise, it falls outside of the scientific method. At that point, it's trolls and fairies and unicorns, because you are now in a fairy tale. You have left science and you are in religion. That's what you're in.
That's what I want to make clear, is the scientific community has my full support, so long as they're following the scientific method.
Absolutely.
And for me, I got the vaccine. I have full faith in the vaccine. I'm fine with it. I believe most of the peer-reviewed data that's out there about COVID-19, I'm on board with all of it. I don't believe when they say, well, the best thing we should do for a 10-year-old that plays with trucks, and 10-year-old girl that plays with trucks, is to mutilate her.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that's the best thing for them.
Yeah. So wait, you're saying that children who aren't even allowed to decide whether they can use nicotine or not, they shouldn't be allowed to change their gender and have surgeries and drugs that they have to be on for the rest of their life? You're saying that we shouldn't let them make those decisions?
I think as a parent, you should definitely not be letting them make that decision, right? And actually, that gets back to that: should government step in here? Right? Should the government say, yeah, there's too many parents that are ill-informed, and we should say that they shouldn't let them mutilate their kids, or should they be allowed to?
Sure. And really, what I think it comes down to is we have to decide and draw a line and say there is a point at which kids can make these decisions, or they can make all the decisions. So are we removing the authority that the parents have? Okay. And we're saying, because we do know that parents of children who don't want them to take drugs and have their gender changed are being forced out by the government because the kids decide that they want to do it. And the parents are being told, you don't have the right to talk to your kid and reason with them, or just flat out forbid them. So we either have to decide, do the parents have the authority or not? And then number two, we have to decide, when does a child get to be an adult and make all the decisions for themselves? And we have to go one way or another with it. We either have to say kids get to make all the decisions that they want, or we agree that, there's a point at which we don't trust kids to make a decision. I don't trust my kids to make a lot of decisions. They would never brush their teeth or put on deodorant if I didn't make them do it. Okay. And these are things that I know are good for their teeth. So that's why we force them to do that. They have to eat vegetables. We don't just sit down a big bowl of granulated sugar for breakfast every morning. So I don't trust my kids to make good decisions. There's a point at which they're going to be on their own. And I know they're going to do it, and I'm putting in the time and energy. But which way do you lean on that?
Here's my thing again. I kind of go back to that helmet theory, right? The power that I give the government to tell parents that believe in this stuff if I give the government the power to stop them, that's the same power that they're going to use to force parents to trans their kids. That's me. That's where I pause, and I'm like, man, okay. So what if these parents negligently, they start mutilating their kids from a young age, and they get older, and like all of a sudden we see they either die due to suicide or something that's like that. The parents are then legally responsible for that, right? And you could say that the kid can pursue civil action against their own parents. You can, if it resulted in a death, then you can call it child endangerment. As long as you can say a reasonable person would have felt that those actions would have been, bad. Yeah. Right. Then you can make that argument. But that's also where we get into cultural norms. So my thing is the only reason why I think that we are seeing the prevalence of it and right now is because this theory has been given the power of credibility by the government, and if maybe not directly by the government, by government funded institutions, government sponsored institutions. And that is what annoys me the most is people that don't have moral code, they believe in government, right? They don't believe in God, they believe in government. And their God, the government, is telling them that transitioning your kids is a good idea.
Okay, we can go into a whole nother hour on that one. Okay, so let me get back to Christianity and American politics, and let me talk about one gentleman, Alexei de Tocqueville.
De Tocqueville.
Yep, I pronounce it differently every time I pronounce his name, and sometimes I find myself doing it with a French accent, which really drives me nuts that I do that. Yeah,
I don't even know.
Okay, so he said, and for those that don't know, he was a gentleman that came over to the States. I think it was in like 1810 or 12 or 13 or something like that. And he was a Frenchman, and he went back and wrote a book called Democracy in America.
Yep.
And he said, on my arrival in the United States, the religious aspect of the country was the first thing that struck my attention. And the longer I stayed there, the more I perceived the great political consequences resulting from the new state of things. He said, religion in America takes no direct part in the government of society, but it must be regarded as the first of their political institutions. I do not know whether all Americans have a sincere faith in their religion, for who can search the human heart? But I am certain that they hold it to be indispensable to the maintenance of republican institutions. This opinion is not peculiar to a class of citizens or to a party, but it belongs to the whole nation and to every rank of society. So when he was explaining coming to America, he didn't say that this religion was driving the government. He said he was amazed at how many people knew about their religion and how it affected society. And you ready for this? This one's going to sting some Christians. I think Christians want the government to force people to obey their religious moral code because they are too lazy to get out there and do the job that Jesus gave us, which is to make disciples of all men.
And that's what I was saying before, right? Don't be a lazy Christian, right? And you're absolutely right. I think, what's important for us to recognize is the government can't do everything. In fact, it shouldn't do everything. And that's part of the reason why it's a mess. And it's also important to recognize that God, our religious institutions, our moral institutions, whatever that might be for you. Again, I'm going to say you should probably pursue Christianity. But your moral institution is extremely important, more important probably than the government. because that's going to dictate how you enjoy your life.
Mhm.
That's going to dictate how you raise your kids. So yeah, I agree. Kind of, because what he's talking about there is that Christianity is really, it plays a huge role here. It's almost
it's running this society.
It's running the society. It's running their culture.
But it's
but
not
the
running
government.
the government.
Yeah,
You got it.
and that's exactly what we should be.
Absolutely. And if the government was weak enough, if the government was weak to the point that it should be, this would all be a non-issue.
Yeah, exactly.
We wouldn't even be talking about this.
Exactly. And honestly, you could sum this like what, whole 2 hours or
Mhm.
whatever we've been at. You could sum that whole thing with just that is that our religion, Christianity, should rule society, not the government.
Yep. Okay, folks, I'm going to go ahead and just pull the plug on this thing. It's been almost 2 hours. So, Robert, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure we can do this again and talk about another subject. Maybe we have you on, talk about the Second Amendment, because I know that that's going to be an easy one for us.
All day.
Okay. And for everyone at home, if you are listening to us on a podcast, you can follow us or watch us live every Sunday night, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Central, on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Just search Bible Thumper Podcast, and you can find us also on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Blueberry, TuneIn Radio, every single place you can look up a podcast. So please like, download, subscribe, and share these podcasts around. It helps us out a whole bunch. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a good week. And we will talk to you next Sunday night, 7 p.m. Mountain Time.